Hey, look, check this out. It's only one football team in New York State, and that's the Buffalo Bills. With that being said, Bills Mafia has chosen James Cook from Georgia.
Oh, my.
That's right, Stevie Johnson. Only one football team in New York State. That's the Buffalo Bills. Welcome into the Bills Draft Special presented by Caesars Sportsbook. Maddy Glab here alongside Bills insider Chris Brown for night 2 of the 2022 NFL Draft. And just like there were trades in the first round, here we go in the second round. Lots of trades, and the Buffalo Bills are part of it. In fact, they traded back twice, dealing away their 57th pick for number 60, then trading back again for number 63. So we want to welcome our newest member of the Buffalo Bills, running back James Cook out of Georgia. And this is an exciting pick. He's somebody that you guys talked about during One Bills Live today, just what he can bring to a team. This is a versatile running back, the brother of Dalvin Cook. So yes, they do share some similarities. He had more than 1,000 total yards last season, 11 total touchdowns. He's 5'11", 199 pounds, ran a 4.42 at the combine. He's patient with his blocks when you turn on his film. He's a mismatch when it comes to being a pass catcher, and the way that he cuts, the vision that he has when he sees the field. What stands out to you about the newest addition to the Bills?
It's one of the most polished route runners at the running back position in the draft class. This is not a guy that just ran bubble screens and screen plays and some simple now routes. This is a guy that got split outside the numbers, was running fade passes, slants, was running corner routes. This is a polished route runner at the running back position. He can be a dynamic weapon for the Bills in the passing game, and he's got speed to pull away from most people, maybe not all DBs, to take it the distance, but he runs 4.42, as you mentioned, Maddy, and those 1,012 yards, he led the team in all-purpose yards. For a part-time player, because as we've said, Georgia's full of five-star kids. Nobody plays the entire game. It's basically him and his running back mate, Zamir White, as the two primary running backs for Georgia, so they split a lot of time. He still led the team in all-purpose yards. Steve and I were talking about him, as you said, on the show, Maddy, on One Bills Live today, because we thought, picking so low down at 57, that the receiver value was not going to be there for the Bills to add a weapon to the passing game that way, but we thought there would be running back value by the time they got down. The Bills got to trade down 2 more times and still get Cook there at the end of round 2. I think it's a fantastic pick for what they want to do on offense.
Now, Breece Hall was a popular name for the Buffalo Bills in night 1 at that number 25 spot. They didn't go running back there. They decided to go cornerback and take Kaiir Elam out of Florida, but they do go running back in the second round. And to think about the skill set that this player offers and how he is such a mismatch when it comes to pass catching, and to pair him up with a quarterback like Josh Allen, and you look at the big picture of this offense already with Stephon Diggs, with Gabriel Davis, with Isaiah McKenzie, with Devin Singletary, to introduce a player like James Cook into the mix who has NFL bloodlines, the offense just becomes even scarier with what a player like James Cook could do if he sees the field this year.
Yeah, it's going to be a hell of a competition between him and Duke Johnson to be the primary pass-catching back in this offense. Cook is going to have to get up to speed very quickly if he's going to unseat a veteran pass catcher like Duke Johnson. And as you mentioned, Breece Hall went at pick 36 to the Jets, who traded up to go get him. So Breece Hall will be playing in the division. And then a few picks later, Seattle takes Kenneth Walker out of Michigan State. And then you go all the way down the board to the Bills at 63. They take the next running back off the board at the bottom of round 2. But let's check in with senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, who was on with Steve and I earlier today, raving about James Cook, one of his favorites in the draft. It's a good night for you, Greg, because your 2 favorite guys from Georgia, Pickens and Cook, go off the board.
Hey, I got lucky. You know what, Chris? I got lucky with James Cook. He was, I just thought he fit the Bills really, really well. We spent time this afternoon talking about that. Obviously, that they are not looking for a feature back. There's nothing wrong with Breece Hall. You could certainly argue he was the most complete overall back in the draft. If you're looking for a back to carry 18 to 22 times a game, the Bills are not looking for that. They're looking for an explosive, multi-dimensional weapon, and that's what James Cook is. James Cook can line up outside. He can line up split from your formation. He can run wide receiver routes. the point I made this afternoon, which is worth making again, we're not going to sit here and say, as we speak at this moment on draft night, that he's Alvin Kamara, but he can be deployed in the same way that Alvin Kamara can be deployed. That's the point. Not that he's the exact same player, on April 29th as Alvin Kamara is, who's been in the league for 4 or 5 years. But people also need to remember that Alvin Kamara was a third-round pick. So James Cook's a second-round pick with a lot of the same traits that Kamara had coming out of the University of Tennessee.
What is it about James Cook's traits that you have seen from watching tape at Georgia that you think is going to transition the best into the NFL?
Well, Maddy, there's a lot. First of all, he's a very, very good runner. It's just that he's not big enough to be a foundation back. He's under 200 pounds, but he has all the traits you would look for if you're looking for a back. I mean, he has patience, vision, burst, lateral quickness, balance. He can re-accelerate. He can take it to the house. We saw a couple of clips that, well, you were talking before I came on, where he just ran away from people, and you're talking the SEC where he played. But the key thing is his ability in the passing game. He is probably the purest receiving back in this draft in what he can do, not only with your conventional out of the backfield routes like arrow routes and angle routes, but also you can split him out and he can run intermediate and vertical routes. And normally you get very good matchups when you do that. So that's what separates him for a team like the Buffalo Bills, who are not looking, Chris, obviously, as we discussed this afternoon, they're not looking for a 20 to 22 carry it back game back. That's not what they're looking for in the context of their offense.
Now, Greg, knowing you've watched more film than probably all of us put together, in the instances, because we know most of these backs that come out of college, they're not asked to pass protect very often. They're asked to go make plays.
Right.
In the instances where he had to stay in there in pass protection, maybe in the few instances you saw him do that, how did he hold up?
I think he's okay. I mean, all backs for the most part need work at that, but I don't think there's a lack of willingness to do it. And then you teach technique. And obviously all backs do have to do that, particularly ones who are going to play in passing situations. And that's what he's going to do, certainly. And he's not always going to be split out. Although we've seen over the last couple of years, there certainly have been instances where the Bills have featured empty sets, but it's that becomes opponent specific. But yeah, so he'll learn more about how to do that. And then you have to read fronts. But the one thing about Georgia is they teach a lot of these things because Georgia is, I don't want to say that they're conventional in the way old school teams are conventional, but more so than many that just spread the offense. So he's been at least schooled in what to look for, because backs, when they're in the backfield, they have to be able to read fronts just like the quarterback, because they have to understand who they have to block. It's not random. They don't just block someone, oh, I think I'll go get him. You have to understand fronts and actually coverages that go with that, so you know who to block if there's a pressure scheme.
Chris was talking about this earlier just before we had you on. You know, at Georgia, there are so many good players, so James Cook also had to wait his turn a little bit. It wasn't like he was the guy for the entirety of his career with the Georgia Bulldogs. He was in and out of the lineup just like he may be with the Buffalo Bills. So how can a player like this, who had over 1,000 total yards and 11 touchdowns, how can a player like this help Josh Allen and help the offense take the next step that they want to take this season?
Well, for your first point, Matt, he only had 297 touches in his 40-year career at Georgia. So there's no wear and tear on his body. And the key thing, and this is what I think the Bills are all about, which we've seen over the last couple of years as Josh Allen has grown as a quarterback, and more teams talk like this, the Bills are about explosive plays. Look, every team in any given game has moments where you do have to grind it out. But when you're speaking philosophically of how you want to play, what do you want your offense to look like, the Bills want their offense to be an explosive offense that starts with Josh Allen. And that's not going to change. And James Cook fits that because he's an explosive weapon. I think a few years ago, they probably thought, because they weren't certain yet about Josh, when they drafted Zach Moss, they were probably thinking, hey, let's get a grinder, let's get a sustainer. I think because of the development of Josh, and you guys might know this more than I, you're there, but I think with the development of Josh, based on tape study anyway, I don't think they think that way anymore. And I think that's why James Cook is a perfect fit for them.
And then, just with respect to Duke Johnson, who was on this roster, Greg, we're anticipating a training camp battle between him and Cook. How can you compare and contrast those two? Have you seen enough of Duke Johnson over the years to kind of know what he is?
Similar, but Cook's a more explosive athlete.
Right.
So I think that's the key part. The bottom line is they might be in competition, Chris, but James Cook's not going to get cut. So, you know, however it plays out, that doesn't mean that week one he's on the active roster. We don't know how any of this plays out. But barring anything unforeseen, James Cook will develop into an important player for this offense. Whether it happens through training camp on week one, that remains to be seen. But he was not drafted with this pick to be cut, and his skill set is clearly such that he fits exactly what they want to do.
Last question for me. Now we have 2 picks for the Buffalo Bills, a lot more left in the NFL draft for all of these teams. But of these 2 picks, what do you think about how the Bills have drafted so far? A quarterback and a running back, both coming from SEC schools.
Yeah, I think they've done really, really well because we talked about Kair Elam last night, a player that I think is a really strong prospect as well. He's a man corner. He's a physical corner. He's got length. Therefore, he can match up not only to wide receivers, but Chris made a great point today when we were speaking about Elam that he could potentially match up to tight ends if they feel the need to do that, depending on the opponent. We know they play the Chiefs again this year, but there's certainly others. So I think Elam was a really strong pick. That was a great pick in a position of need. And that's the way teams, for the most part, draft. They pick the best player for a position of need. That's why the Bills traded to get Elam, because they needed a corner and they didn't want to wait. And Cook, we've just spoken about, and we don't need to reiterate the same points. So I think they've done really, really well based on my evaluations. That's the only way I can do it, guys. You know, I don't get into what others think. Based on my evaluations, they're very, very good prospects.
And then, Greg, the Bills now have about 4 sixth-round picks. How deep does your film study go?
I've done about 205 players, Chris.
We might be all right.
So, well, you know, I guess we'll find out, you know, on Monday. We'll see. We'll see. You know, I might have to take tomorrow off. I've worked every day, I think, since last August, so I might need a day off tomorrow.
I think you've deserved it, Greg. Thanks so much for the insight. We appreciate it greatly. Please go take a break now.
I think I'm going to go home now. I'm in my office. Unfortunately, I have a short ride. And believe it or not, I might not see the third round. I might have to see the picks tomorrow on online. So we'll see.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Good.
Thanks, guys.